Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at gcnlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Good morning, America. This is Rich Scheben from OffGridMontana.com. Sitting in for Vincent Finelli today, this Friday. And we have Blake engineering the broadcast. And what we're going to talk about today, on the second hour, I'm going to talk some Economic 101 and dovetail them with some of the propaganda and politically correct articles that I've seen on the Internet over the last 24 hours. And the first hour, we're going to talk to Sharon from here in northwest Montana, and she's going to talk about some self-sufficiency techniques and some lifestyle techniques, and specifically about chickens. And just share a lifestyle with you, since 90% of Americans live in urban, suburban America, and only 10% of us obviously live rural. So hopefully she can share some insights with you that may want to have you change your plan of action, if you will. So Sharon, welcome to the broadcast.
Well, good morning.
How are you today?
I'm doing well. Have you got snow up where you're at? We got a little dumping of snow here, which was what's supposed to happen as far as I'm concerned.
This has been the craziest. I know it's spring, but I'm going to use the term winter that I've ever seen. We were about 70% snow-free up until a few days ago, and we had another dumping. And we're going to be in the 50s for highs, sounds like all of next week. So it sounds like spring's not going to be here till like Sunday or Monday. And I'm planning on doing some spring gobbler hunting in the snow this year. It's insane.
Yeah. Well, I have chicks coming in on Wednesday or Thursday, and there's snow on my porch, but that's okay. I thought maybe we just kind of discuss chickens a little bit, because there's kind of I would say sort of mild delusion out there that you just get some chickens, let them run around, they'll lay all the eggs you want, and when you're hungry, you just butcher chicken. And I actually heard a lady pretty much say that on a radio program a while back, and I thought, raising chickens isn't really complicated, but it's not quite that simple. Possibly if you lived in the tropics, you might pull that off, but everywhere else, that's probably not going to work that way. So I thought maybe we could just kind of discuss a few facts about chickens. Oh,
absolutely. I have them. I've had them for years. Well, you've been to my hobby farm, so you know what we have here. And we use the Buff Orpington breed, which I like them because they're great layers. They're a good-sized chicken for eating, and they're pretty good brooders, and they're very hardy. So tell us what you got some peeps coming in, and what breeds do you have, and what's your favorite, Sharon?
Well, we kind of I order through Murray McMurray just to make a point, because they are really good. We've had chickens like over 25 years, and at least 22 of those I've probably ordered from them, and I've had really good success with their chicks coming alive and staying alive and all that. But I like their Red Star a lot because they're a medium-sized chicken that lay big eggs. But we also order what I call the meat chickens. They're basically bred for raising meat, and they're a Cornish cross, and they say they're ready to process in 8 weeks, but they're not all that big, in my opinion. We like our chickens really big, get a lot of meat. So I usually go about 10 weeks for the roosters and 12 for the hens, because hens grow a little slower. And we average, we don't pluck them, we skin and gut them. So after you skin and gut them, they weigh around 5 pounds each. So you get a lot of meat. So I'm getting them both in, and I just put them in 2 little sections in our room. We have a big room for them. Anyway, I was going to kind of get on why you might raise them, just some ideas. Is that okay? Or
Absolutely. Please,
Okay.
please tell, since 90% of Americans are urban, suburban Americans, living Americans, tell people from a beginner's, layperson standpoint what people should be looking for regarding the type of property, the type of feed, the breeds of chicken, maybe according to seasonality and region. Go ahead and just go for it, Sharon.
Okay, I was also going to mention, I ordered some Buff Orpingtons, too, because they set really well, and they are good chickens, okay? We kind of do this to where they end up paying for themselves, okay? So I use the Red Star because they're the top layers. Anyway, I was going to say some of the reasons you might want to raise them, of course, is for eggs, meat. They're kind of fun to watch. Some people actually turn them into pets, and they're a really good way to recycle your scraps in your garden stuff, if you do garden. But their needs are pretty simple. They need food, water, and some shelter. And depending on where you're living, you probably should have a pen. We had 5 acres before that we could just let them run, kind of like you guys do. Where we're at, there's too many stray dogs, just wild animals. So we built a really, really large pen for our chickens to run in. So you kind of have to take that into account. There are a lot of things that like to eat chickens, like other people's dogs. And we had eagles and hawks out where you used to live. And there's just, so you kind of have to be aware of your surroundings. And if you do let them run, it's really fun to watch them, because we did it on our other property. We trained our dogs to leave them alone. But they do poop everywhere. So you'll have to be aware of where you're walking if you let them run everywhere. So it's just a thought. As far as shelter, it doesn't have to be elaborate. We've actually just built a plywood structure before. A wood floor if you want, or it can even be on the ground. But we're up north, so we kind of like to have a floor, a little more secure. When we used a wood floor, we used underground paint on it to keep it from rotting out, which worked really well. I mean, we had one for 13 years, and it's still solid as all get out. We currently have what I would say is the very best, which is a concrete floor. It is immensely easier to clean, but it's not necessary. You don't have to have them. If you want your chickens to lay all winter, they need at least 12 hours of light a day, so you might want to get some form of electricity out there, and we put our lights on a timer now, so it makes it a lot easier. They need some kind of cross ventilation in the shelter, especially in the summer where it's hot. And you actually need ventilation in the winter, or they'll get this kind of croupy cough stuff that they get, which isn't too good for them, and they can even die from it. If you need to feed them, that's why I was kind of sort of laughing, a little annoyed at this lady that they're just going to run around and eat bugs all day. And they can do fairly well for a while, but they really do need some feed to supplement it, and that isn't going to work all winter if you look up here in the north or most places. And if you want optimum laying, you really do need to supplement with food, regular food. Even the old-timers back in the 1900s would buy big bags of scratch, which was mixed green, and they threw it out to the chickens. So let's see. There's a lot of things. They're really neat. You don't have to have a rooster to have chickens, but if you want to have chicks, you have to have a rooster in order to. And that's kind of obvious, probably to you and I, but I have discovered a lot of people haven't really thought that through. So,
that was going to be one of my next questions. There's certain books that recommend a certain number of chickens to rooster ratio. If you don't have, for example, if you have less than 8 chickens, they absolutely recommend that you have only one rooster, because when we have babies, I don't buy it. We haven't bought chicks in a long time. Now we do try to buy. We really enjoy the silky panties. Doesn't matter what color they are, black, white, or beige. And
yeah, they're cute.
They're great brooders. They're cute. And the problem with buying banties is that you buy them in a straight run, which means that they're not really sexed. And I think they are, but 9 out of 10 that I buy are roosters, and I have to give them away. They're too cute to eat, so I give them away to a good home. So anyway, it all depends on the size of your flock, depending on how many roosters you have to have. And, of course, it depends on your neighborhood. You might have, I know of neighborhoods, even if people who have 5 acres like you do, that roosters are banned in covenants because some neighbors complain. And you mentioned about the poop. We wear rubber boots here because we have, guard dogs, Great Pyrenees dogs, and goats, and chickens, and I mean, you name it, we have it here. And we wear rubber boots, and we make sure that we always take our shoes off before we go into the cabin, because one thing about chicken poop, folks, it's almost like cement. When that hardens, it's very difficult to get rid of. And that's one of the reasons I use, personally, I use hay. I have an old camper trailer, which is the chicken coop, works out great. I can keep all the chicken paraphernalia in there, the feed in there, everything. And then when I harvest that old straw, I put it in a compost pile, and at the end of the fall, when I'm done gardening, I take that compost and it goes into the garden and really supplements the nutrients in the garden. Sharon?
Yeah, we put some type of bedding down. I know straw is great, but we have a lot of chickens, and it's mats really bad. So we were able to get a bunch of, like, wood chips, and I throw that down. It's a little easier to clean up. I put straw in their nest, though, so it still kind of gets down on the ground, but it makes it a little bit easier. We've gotten a little bit on the older side, and, and we try to minimize our work.
That's living smart. I agree.
So it's easier for us to scoop out the matted down chips than it is to do straw myself. But, it works straw. We did it for years. It's just our children got the benefit of cleaning the coops most of the time, and it's now down to us. So we're trying to think of how can we make this easier, which is why at this new place that we moved to, we put in concrete floor. And I was truly amazed at how much difference that made. But it's perfectly fine to use wood floor, and we actually raised meat chickens on just a plywood shelter on the dirt, and it was fine because it was through summer, So you can actually do it quite easy. But people have this illusion, at least some people do, that there's nothing to this. And chicks, they have to brood, and they set their eggs if you can get that. But half of the chickens that come out will probably be roosters, right? And there is a minimum. You don't want too many roosters that they just bother the hens to death, plus they fight if you get too many of them. I heard the average is like one rooster for every 8 to 10-ish hens is a good idea. We usually have 2 or 3 around. We also personally no longer mess around with mean roosters.
Well, folks, hold on till the break is over. We appreciate you being here. We'll be back with Sharon from Northwest Montana shortly. Good morning, America. This is Rich Scheben filling in for Vincent Finelli this morning. And my guest is Sharon from also here in Northwest Montana. We're talking about self-sufficiency in chickens, and I found a couple of articles that are kind of relevant to what we're talking about in a tangent way, Sharon. And one article was 1/3 of college students are hungry and homeless, and of course, with the cost of tuition because of the subsidies from the American taxpayers, the colleges tend to, kind of like healthcare, take advantage of the people. When they get more money, they ask for more money. And there's so many young people in America who are forced to rent because they can't establish time equity or paying off principal on land or homes, so they have to be more consumers and buy more and be less self-sufficient. And there's another article here that talks about tiny getaway cabins, retreats from city, retreats from technology, and other burdens in the modern world. And they recommend you being bored because nature restores, and people are actually paying for this because they're so far out of reach because the imbalance in life between technology and nature is so far that a lot of these young people, and this is directed towards millennials, this article, people can't even wrap their head around the lifestyle that you and I have. And this is one of the reasons why here on USAPrepares.com we talk about things like this, because we talk about ideas and solutions. But just think if you lived outside the more rural area while you're going to college and you raised chickens and you basically made a little business for people who live outside the dorms and frat houses and sorority houses, and you create literally a little business of raising chickens and selling eggs, that could go a long way to making your life a little easier in the liability column. So that being said, Sharon, I'm curious, how many chickens, now that you are empty nesters, how many chickens do you eat? And what do you, for the person listening to this who wants to move rural, or even maybe in a suburbia area where they're allowed to have chickens but no roosters, how much money or dollars do you invest in starting this project, and what are your recommendations?
Well, we start out with probably 8 or something chickens way back, and then we end up with 12 or something. We actually have quite a system going now because they pay for themselves, okay? I have probably 40-some-odd layers, and I sell eggs. And by selling the eggs, I sell them as non-GMO because I buy organic feed, and then we supplement with grain that we buy from a farmer. And I am able, on good years like last year and this year, to be able to buy new chicks, get meat chicks, get them raised all the way up, about 20 of them, and I don't have any money out of my pocket. They pay for themselves by the money that I make by selling eggs. So we've got it down to where it's very cost-effective for us. There is work involved, but then meanwhile, we're getting free meat, and we're getting our eggs free that we're eating, okay, for some effort. So that's where we've evolved to. That's not what we did before, but I still think it's a good idea to have chickens, even if you can't make them quite as cost-productive. But if you have more, you can find people who love farm-fresh eggs, and you don't have to sell them super cheap. I sell them for $3 a dozen, and that's a good deal, okay? And people, I'm getting so many people I can't sell them all. Okay, I mean, can't supply everybody. But the advantage of having chickens is if things kind of get more rough and you happen to have some that will go brood, or you can make your own incubator, you can keep replacing them. But people do have to realize that from the time a chick hatches to the time it lays eggs is approximately 5 months. And when they first start laying, they lay these little cute, but little pullet eggs. And it can take up to usually less than 4 weeks, or up to laying big ones, although last year my batch, some took till they were 6 weeks after they started laying to get big ones. The other fun thing about that, though, is that sometimes they lay these big, huge eggs that are double yolkers. And if you have kids, they find that very fun. But it isn't a bad idea to have them. It's just that people have this idea. It's music.
Yeah. Okay, America, please hold. We'll be back with Sharon from Northwest Montana. That's great. Hello, America. This is Rich Scheben, filling in for Vincent Finelli today. My guest is Sharon from Northwest Montana also. And Sharon, I was just looking out my window during the commercial break and looking at the 8 brand new baby goats and the Great Pyrenees rolling around, wrestling in the snow, and the entertainment value from having farm animals is, you can't put a value on it. Whether it be peeps or chicks, whatever you call them, all the way to the roosters. They're so cute, and it really is a lifestyle besides a supplement of learning skill sets and being easier on the wallet, and of course, because it can be more GMO, more healthier, or I should say non-GMO. It's obviously a better way to go. So I just want to let you know we also skin our chickens because plucking takes too long. And we try to make everything as easy and simple as possible. And despite the fact that, like the article I cited earlier in the show talking about how people, regarding the tiny getaway cabins, the retreats for the millennials, and that the owners of these cabins recommend that people be bored. When you live in nature, it restores your whole body, from mind, body, soul. It makes you become more of a thinker. And the chores that you have in the outdoors in nature is actually revitalizing, not to mention, keeping your skill sets up, keeping your aptitude up. And with all the visitors, I probably have had thousands of visitors, especially since I wrote the book. I came out with the DVD video, and people are very hungry for Plan B. They're hungry to supplement their income. They're hungry to think outside the box because everybody can see where we're going in this country regarding prosperity, especially for the bottom 93%. So that being said, Sharon, what other recommendations you have regarding this lifestyle and your chicken. I mean, you have 45 chickens. That's a lot of chickens. How many chickens do you eat per year, and how many peeps do you get just through natural production?
Well, I was going to cover a couple things because you asked me about how much it costs to get set up. Okay, so Kyle and I were talking about it, and probably if you're creative, probably for like $150 or so, you could build a simple structure, maybe like a lean-to, like roof with a little bit of tin on top of it, and you could get chicks. So probably, somewhere around 150. You could get more creative, like he built a meat coop, just because meat chickens don't live that long. You know what I mean? You're raising them for meat. We had almost nothing into it because he found some old plywood, and we had some old tin. I think you had to buy a hinge for the door, and then we just set it on the ground. If you're going to live like where we do in the north, you probably want a floor for your regular layer hens. So you can actually get into it pretty inexpensive, or if you're like where you're at, you use your camper, or a lot of people use lots of old buildings. I mean, chickens just need shelter to keep the rain and snow off of them and the heat in the summer, place to go. And it's nice if it's insulated, but they don't actually have to be insulated. Even up here, we had coops for a long time that weren't insulated at all. And they just need to have food, shelter, and a way to keep the wind off of them, So, and ventilation. And if you want them to lay all winter, you do need to put lights on them because they'll pretty much cut back and not lay at all. And for us, we want our chickens to be productive. I'm not willing to pay them for months on end if they're not going to lay. So that's just the way we look at life. They pretty much will lay, though I should let people know that they lay pretty well for 2 years. And then after that, they'll start cutting back. They might lay 2 every 3 days, or they might lay 1 every other day. So we actually pull them out after 2 years because we're into making sure that they kind of pay for themselves, okay? But for a coop, I was going to suggest a couple things that we've learned. We like to build a coop, and we like to put the nesting boxes at the front, okay? That way you don't have to walk across a whole bunch of poop to get to the eggs. We put the roost in the back, which is where they sit. They do the majority of their eliminating. And then we put the food and water kind of in the middle. And that kind of minimizes how much guts you're stepping on, okay? Although I personally have chore shoes that you just slip on. So I can go in and out. And also just another little hint, sometimes hens like to peck when you're trying to get the eggs. And people go, how would you peck? I'm thinking, well, okay, let's think this out. I used to tear when the bags were feed. They'd kind of moved to kind of a plastic kind of embedded stuff. I would just tear a big chunk out, and I put the piece of bag between my hand and the chicken and got the egg. I now use an empty coffee can, and I just stick it over the head, I grab out the eggs, and I take the coffee can off their head. So you really don't have to deal with the impact all the time. Some hens are nice and compliant. They'll let you steal their eggs from underneath them, but some are more aggressive. So that just keeps you from getting pecked. It's just a simple, thing to do. Also, we like to put our empty ashes in a box in the coop because the chickens like to dust even in the winter. And I've been known to throw some diatomaceous earth in that, too, to kind of keep any kind of mite infestation or anything down. It works pretty well. We also, because up here they can't really go out a whole lot when it starts snowing everywhere, we put the third cutting of alfalfa that has a whole lot of leafy stuff. And my husband built this little kind of holder to put it in on the side of the wall, and they like to peck at that all winter, so it gives them a little fresh greens. And in the past, I've actually sprouted old wheat that we had from way before Y2K. I just sprouted it, and I gave it to them, and they absolutely love that. But I didn't do that this year. So just some ideas. And then in the spring, I feed them a whole lot of the greens that are out there because we don't let them run the whole property, okay? So I pull up, we got dandelions galore here. I throw it in there, and they just think that's like salad. I mean, they love it, like candy. So that's some of the things you can do.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm sorry, Sharon. I thought you were done.
Oh, yeah. No.
I like to keep my chickens free-ranging because they are excellent grasshopper hunters, and we have a garden here, if you recall. And grasshoppers in the midsummer can be an issue, and they're great hunters. And I wanted to ask you, because you have different species, do you have any issues with cross-breeding issues where a meat chicken might get into your layer hens and stuff like that? And I definitely agree with what you're talking about regarding the liability asset column, and it all has to pencil out, unless, it's a hobby and you really enjoy it and you can justify it, which I certainly agree, but a logical business perspective is always makes a lot more sense. And what I do is I don't mind being pecked in the summer, but most of the year I'm wearing gloves because I'm working and doing things, and if they peck my gloves, I don't really care. In the summertime, what I'll do is before I go into the coop, I'll sing disco songs, and usually the chickens get scared and they run out of the nesting boxes, and I have free range to pick up the eggs. Mm-hmm. I just said that to see if people were, if anybody was listening or was falling asleep. I just had to throw that in there. But anyway, it's a great lifestyle. It really is a lifestyle. It really is entertainment, and it does pencil out with eggs, with meat. And it's unbelievable when people come here. I've had people here from all over the country, from Europe. They either heard me give a talk or read my book or something, and they're like, man, what a lifestyle. Because people, the pioneering and homesteading that early Americans did and the skill set that were passed on to generations is no longer there. We're teaching our children and our youth how to push buttons, manage paper, and be politically correct. And that's why there's like this tiny little getaway retreat that I read the article about in the Catskills in upstate New York, where they're basically marketing people to get away from the cities, from the technocracy, the technology, all the burdens in the modern world, and recommend you restoring your mind and your body in nature. And like I said, they even recommend you being bored. But they're paying for this. And, our recommendation at usaprepares.com is to think about doing this lifestyle change, this thinking about self-sufficiency and having fun in nature and actually doing this as a lifestyle and for a living. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that briefly in the second hour when I talk about some of the Economics 101 and some of the articles that I've read recently. That's going to be very relevant to our discussion, especially discussing political correctness, which is one of my favorite topics to talk about. So, Sharon, you've been doing this for a long time with the chickens.
Yeah.
If somebody lives in a suburban area, mm-hmm. and they might not be aware of covenants, and because the covenants might not even be aware of the chicken business or the chicken hobby, because so many Americans have been disconnected from this lifestyle. Do you recommend people around the country who have a little backyard having some hens, maybe even disguising it as a doghouse if they have a privacy fence, not having a rooster, and just starting a little bit of a hobby and getting some direct benefits from the eggs and meat?
Yeah, I think you can. In fact, a lot of places are allowing you to have 4 or 5 hens. They don't want to have roosters because roosters have a tendency to crow, and people who aren't used to that find that objectionable. But I think it's just a fun hobby. I mean, it's fun throwing scraps out and watching chicks. Okay, and my sisters each had chickens at one point with their kids, and they actually made pets out of them. Chickens are actually a little smarter than you think, although I think they're dumb, but they're actually not quite as dumb as you might think. And black people like to make real little pets and everything out of their little chickens. And the possible drawback is if, depending on what you're doing it for, they aren't going to lay as well after a couple of years. Okay, so I've actually kept, I had a beautiful old English rooster, and I let him die of old age. Okay, he wasn't productive, but he was just beautiful. And I had another great big old Red Ranger type rooster. We'd bought a few of those to see about the meat, because they're crossover. They lay and then they also are big for meat. And he was such a cool, neat rooster that I let him die of old age. But we tend to take a more practical approach. And honestly, I was going to mention, if you think you're going to eat your layer hens, there's not much meat on them. We skin gutted, and I cooked down, and I had less than a quart of meat on the layer, from the layer meat in a baggie, less than a quart baggie. And so you can do it. I mean, it would be fine for, chicken pot pie or chicken and nut dumplings or something like that, but you're not going to be getting a lot of meat per pound that way. That's why we raise meat chickens also.
Well, folks, hold on. We'll be back with Sharon from Northwest Montana after the break. Hello, America. Rich Scheben sitting in for Vincent Finelli today. We are with Sharon from Northwest Montana as well. And, Sharon, you were talking about how attached you get to the animals, and there's actually a funny chicken documentary out there that shows how people put diapers on chickens and leave them in the house. It really is hilarious. I wish I could think of the name of it. We have it somewhere. And, but, you know, I don't go a day without hugging one of my pets or farm animals, especially baby goats and my Great Pyrenees dogs, or petting one of the barn cats. And we have a rule around here that we don't name the food. So if it's a chicken, we don't give them names. But tell the listeners, Sharon, how do you, you know, what we usually do is we'll start often with chicken soup. We'll let the bone marrow go into the soup, and we'll eat it that way. Then we'll sometimes tear apart after like the second or third day, tear apart the chicken or the turkey off the bones, leave it in, have another day of soup. Or we'll cook it in a roasting pan, and then after the second day, we'll make chicken salad or turkey salad. Or sometimes once in a blue moon, we'll fry it. But how do you prepare, with all the chickens that you eat, how do you prepare your food in order to have a little variety and not have the same thing all the time?
Well, we actually have freezers. Okay, so when I skin and gut a chicken, I cut it up and I package it separately, like I put breasts together, or one breast by itself, and then I do the thighs, and then I do drumsticks, and I cook the rest down, and I can it, and I can the broth, and then I use it for all kinds of stuff. I don't use take the whole chicken. I was going to say something, because I know kind of where your bent is and stuff, that I'm pretty big on, if there's a will, there's probably a way, you know what I mean? So I feel that people should not just have knowledge, but they should experience. Like, it's one thing to say, I know how you should can. It's a different thing to actually can it. And I think it's a really good idea to get even a few chickens to learn how to raise chickens. Okay? People, I'm just going to do this. And there is still a learning curve. And anything that you can learn to do yourself, I think, makes you in a better position if things change. Okay? And there is a lot of enjoyment in having, like, little chicks and stuff. We enjoy it. There are some tricks to raising little chicks, because people say, well, I'll just buy some chickens. Well, you can't hardly find chickens to buy, and if they are, they're older ones. And our first experience way back when we used to live in Alaska is we bought some chickens. Well, guess what? They're older. They don't lay very well, okay? And we didn't know. And chickens do the most of their laying in the first 2 years. So if you're getting a 3 or 4 year old chicken, yeah, it might lay an egg every 3 or 4 days, but that's probably not the most productive way to get chickens. So it's just a learning curve. You know, we actually have had a friend of ours take the eggs from the Red Star ones and hatch them out, and they laid really well. Okay, so they're not a bad breed. I've actually had other breeds because they're just cool looking. But at this point, we're endeavoring to make our chickens pay for themselves. So we have free eggs and free meat. So this last batch, I ordered a bunch of Red Star, and I ordered about 6 other odd ones. And we do not mix our meat chickens with the layer chickens when we raise them, because they grow so big that the meat chickens will run over, literally, the layer chicks, because they grow much slower. So we just have 2 different pens for them, because the meat chickens are full grown within about, you know, like they say 8 weeks, but we go 10 to 12, like I said, because I think it's cost productive to put more food into them and get a lot more meat. Okay, so that's the way we do it. But as far as layer hens, if you want to use them for meat, you know, you let them lay their eggs for 2 years. You could skin and gut them, and then I personally would pressure can the meat off, and then I would take the broth and strain it and can it, and I would take the meat and clean it up because they have like little sinew stuff in it, and then I would can that. And that meat would work really well for, you know, like I said, you could do chicken pot pie, you could do chicken dumplings, you could do chicken quesadillas. I mean, there's all kinds of recipes that you would just use cooked chicken meat in.
Sharon, I want to thank you for being on the show today. You've had some great advice, and great advice for a lifestyle as well. Thank you for being on, and you have a great morning.
All right, thanks. Bye.
Okay, America, we will be back after the break. Good morning, America. This is Rich Scheben from OffGridMontana.com, sitting in for Vincent Finelli today on this beautiful Friday morning. I hope everybody's doing well, and happy TGIF to all of you out there. in America. Now, last hour we talked with Sharon, who is also from northwest Montana, about self-sufficiency and a certain lifestyle regarding raising chickens. So I'm going to use this as a bridge to reiterate what me and Vincent Finelli talked about just this past Tuesday. And we were talking about creating a business plan and using the medium and venue that Vincent Finelli has on usaprepares.com to help out as many people as possible. Because, as you've heard me say many times if you're a regular listener, we're teaching our youth how to push buttons, manage paper, and be politically correct. And that's one of the reasons why I always talk about Economy 101, is to show that the people, the little people, the middle class that's melding in with the poor, the bottom 93% of people, or as far as income earners, are losing ground. And just one of the statistics that I've read recently says since 2000, home ownership for people 45 and under has plunged 20% to 20%. And this is a sign of the times where the powers that be are herding people like sheeple into urban, suburban America, and people are leaving rural America. And when you look at the statistics of equality, prosperity, inclusiveness, fairness, all these politically correct buzzwords that the powers that be use to have us relax, that they've got everything under control, they don't. Because 50% of Americans can't even come up with $1,000. 69% of Americans don't even have $1,000 in savings. 78% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. So, as the deterioration of America's middle class continues, we need to have a business plan for self-sufficiency, for creating a lifestyle, for thinking outside the box. And that's one of the reasons why we had Sharon on to talk about chickens. And, of course, having a chicken coop is not going to change your lifestyle, but it could be a start. It could be a start if you live in suburbia and you're allowed to have a few chickens without a rooster and have the responsibility of raising them, collecting a few eggs, harvesting a few chickens when they get too old to produce eggs. And who knows where it might go from there. I grew up in the metropolitan area of New York City. I was born in Jamaica, Queens. And I was in the Boy Scouts for a few years. And I went to Boy Scout day camp. I went to overnight camp. I was indoctrinated into nature, into canoeing, into fishing, into camping. And I just fell in love with Mother Nature. And I've been in Montana for 31 years because this has been my dream to come to the Northern Rockies, live off-grid, be self-sufficient, and have a lifestyle that's very different from the masses, because 0.1% of people live in America off-grid, probably not including Alaska. But I think with what's happening in our economy and the corruption, the manipulation, the deception, the nepotism, the subsidies, money printing, special interest groups, lobbyists, PACs, the stagflationary economy that we're in, it's pretty obvious that the great majority of Americans are losing ground. So what we're going to do, Vince is going to have a new email address for the public. And we're not just going to take your questions on what we can discuss with greater specificity and detail, but we're also going to have a venue for like-minded people to come to this website, this email, and we're going to combine their dreams and goals, and we're going to share skill sets. And no, this isn't a commune, but what we're going to have is an end game. We're going to get Tom, Dick, and Harry, and Sue and Jane and Alice together, and we're going to say, well, this person has capital resources. This person is a builder. This person can put together a solar array. This person's a great gardener. This person knows how to raise animals and hunt and fish and butcher, and this person's a great canner. This person has a home business that they could work out of the home and create cash flow for the business. And what you do is you buy raw land, you park it out, you build your structures, your main cabin, your guest cabin, your barn, your garden, you put up your solar array, you put up fences for the animals, and you literally have an end game, say 5 years. And I'm shooting from the hip here, folks. I'm trying to generalize. And in 5 years, you sell that property. And it's already pre-negotiated based on capital resources, in other words, money that you put into the project. It's already pre-negotiated on labor that you put into the project. And you have a hierarchy based on what you put into the kitty. And it's all pre-negotiated. It's on paper. And in 5 years, you sell that property, and it turns into a business model where you're starting from scratch. You're cross-training one another. You're creating a lifestyle, but you also have a business. And this is what we want to do for the average Joe, because the average Joe is losing too much ground. And I think I mentioned this just a few days ago on the air, where home equity loans are now turning into, they've put a metaphor on it, houses on ATMs, in the context of people are so broke, they're literally going into their home equity, taking out loans. It's synonymous to margin debt. And it's very sad, because people just don't have the cash flow to create their lifestyle or to pay their bills. And that's why credit card and school loans and everything is so high and so much in the red. Auto loans as well. There's a subprime, more subprime industry in auto loans. It's the home ownership is now turning back into a subprime. So the government's looking for money, and the people are running out of it, especially the bottom 93%. And if you look at the spread between the, I read this article a couple days ago, the spread between the S&P and margin debt is 4 times greater than right before the 2000 and 2007 crashes. Let me repeat that. The spread between the S&P and margin debt, and for those of you who isn't aware of margin debt, it's basically you have a stock portfolio and you're borrowing from your stock portfolio equity to buy new stuff, new products. So the spread between the S&P and the margin debt is like 4 times greater than right before the 2000 and 2007 crashes. Now, this is a unit of measure that hardly ever gets discussed. So when it reverses, because people are running out of money and they're desperate, they have to quickly sell off stocks to pay off the debt, the margin debt that they have. And that momentum is going to be unstoppable if it's 4 times greater, the spread, compared to the 2000 and 2007 crashes. So everybody's looking for money, and there's very few people paying the taxes right now because everybody's broke, especially in the bottom 93%. And this is why we talk about ideas and solutions for the people. And I want to make everybody clear on the fact that we're not trying to sell a commune idea. We're trying to sell a business plan. We're trying to get America to think outside the box and retrain from the old homestead pioneer days, and not just relearn those lost 19th century skills, but dovetail them with 21st century technology. For example, my solar array. My solar array is 100% electronic. So it's not like we're living 100% 19th century rugged. We do live pretty rugged compared to most people, but we're doing everything in our power to be informed. We have computers. I don't get any of my news from the mainstream media. I spend hours per day reading and researching, because misinformation that comes from the mainstream media, you could basically say that anybody who gives out propaganda and mainstream and any type of PC type stuff, Hegelian dialectic, professional wordsmithing, subliminal messaging that you get from almost every movie that's out there, and all these politically correct buzzwords like democracy, accountability, diversity, basically words that have been hijacked by definition to use as a tool to divide the American people by groups. And it's pretty obvious that the misinformation from the mainstream media is preying on their listeners. It basically reinforces the aristocracy serfdom relationship. It proves that it's not about prosperity. It's not about equality. It's not about inclusiveness. These are all words that people are using for the divide and conquer of America. The mainstream media is very obvious. Their job is to manufacture perception, pity, guilt, and ideology. Can you even go, for those of you who listen to mainstream media, can you go one day without hearing about race baiting, gender baiting, sex or sexual orientation baiting, religion baiting, ideology or generation baiting? They're doing everything, even if it's a subliminal message, to sway public opinion. And there's only like 5, maybe 6 companies that own all the mediums of media. Now, I'm not just talking magazines, newspapers, television, and radio. I'm talking production companies and publishing companies as well. What we need to do is hold on to our own narrative, theme, talking points based on truth. And I will touch more on that, folks, after the break. Thanks for listening. Good morning, America. This is Rich Scheben sitting in for Vincent Finelli this morning. And happy TGIF to everybody in America. I talk about Economic 101, folks, because it's very relevant to so many topics of discussion, which really shows how the powers that be are trying to poison us against ourselves. And when you really talk about logic and common sense, you talk about objective facts versus subjective emotional opinion, it's very easy to see what's happening. And because of demographics, our debt situation, credit, pensions, valuations, the headwinds for future rates of growth look very bleak. And it's not, when I talk about debt, I just don't mean global debt or corporate debt, government debt, but household debt. Because you got to remember, and I probably don't say this enough, 70% of our economy, our growth, our GDP, and I realize all these books are cooked, but 70% is the domestic consumption. So we got to keep that in mind. Now, I really blame the demographic situation, the corrupt monetary policies from the central banks, Keynesian economics, which I've discussed in great specificity over many months and years. And, of course, I give the biggest blame to what they call group identity politics, a.k.a. victim group status, a.k.a. protectionist group status. This has been the biggest reason for America's demise, because we're not working in synergy. The powers that be, just a few people at the very top who control all the messaging, that sanctioned. You got to remember, the mainstream media, what they say and what they don't say is sanctioned from the very top, from the elite. So group identity politics, the powers that be want to do everything in their power to not just redefine it, but basically use professional wordsmithing to redirect the blame. And that's why they use the term identity politics, which is the most common out there, because they want to get rid of the word group. Now, what has happened in America is that we have lowered the bars of standards and expectations based on what group you're in. And all this talk about immigration, people come here from around the world because they want to control their own destiny. They want to have a chance for prosperity. They want to come for freedom and liberty. And when you lower the bars of standards and expectations based on what ethnicity or skin pigmentation or gender or sexual orientation or all these different groups, not only are you insulting the work ethic, the ability, and the intelligence of all these people, you are eliminating the possibility of synergy and creating a divide and conquer strategy which degrades and disrespects all these people. You never empower a nation, a group, or an individual by lowering the bars of standards and expectation. It's all meant to make the people submissive. It's meant to make you lose your will. They want to break your will. They want to call you an extremist, controversial, racist, bigot, sexist, misogynist, homophobe, conspiracy theorist, intolerant, violent hater, with an anti in front of every word you can think of, and an ism, ist, or phobia on the back of every word that you can think of. And this is what America has succumbed to. So all the fake news are basically bought and paid for from the top down. And this is why a lot of the news shows, the so-called entertainment comedy shows, use satire, because the powers that be want to distract, dumb down, and divide the American people. They don't want conversation. They don't want communication. They want to show you that it's better to chant, to scream, to use violence, instead of using your words and using your mind. And that's basically grooming and cultivating the people to be followers and not be thinkers. It's destroying America from within. Because when you reward mediocrity, people, for decade after decade after decade after decade, 2 generations, you're turning America into the law of diminishing returns. You're literally destroying ingenuity, productivity, innovation, opportunity, and knowledge for about 96%. And I'll give some specific examples related to some articles after the break. Thanks for being with us. Good morning, America. This is Rich Scheben sitting in for Vincent Finelli. Happy TGIF to everybody in America. I want to talk about a couple of articles that I read recently. And one article was about David Letterman, who was interviewing Jay-Z. Apparently he's a rapper. I never heard of him, but apparently he's a pretty popular rapper. And they were talking derogatory things about Trump, which is very typical for the powers that be, because they have an addiction to power, money, and control. And they're talking about why white men are so privileged. Now, this is why I talk about practice what you preach laws, folks. And I'll give a couple of examples in a second here, but Jay-Z apparently has a net worth of just under $1 billion. And David Letterman, I don't know what his net worth is, but he owns a 10,000-acre ranch here in Montana. Oh, and by the way, black unemployment is literally recorded right now as being the lowest ever recorded. Now, I want to talk about how great it is to have white male privilege, okay? And I've mentioned this on the air. This is in my book. And I'll make a long story short because we don't have a lot of time. But my plan A to come out to Montana was I was friends with some New York City Fire Department guys when I was young. At 19, I was benching 365 pounds. I could easily pass the test. And that was the year that women's group sued. They couldn't pass the physical test. So they sued to lower the bars of standards and expectations. And if you were a white male, I was told you either have to have pretty good connections or be at least a veteran for veterans credits. So I said, no big deal. So I got a college degree in forestry. I said, well, I'm going to get a job with the National Forest Service and get my butt out to Montana, live my off-grid dream, etc. Well, I went to an interview for the National Forest Service. They told me, some older guy who's probably actually younger than I am right now, he said that we could not hire you as a white male. Making a long story short, he hired 2 girls sitting in a waiting room fresh out of high school, no education, no experience, no nothing. Moving on, chronologically, I worked in the pharmaceutical industry for over 20 years, and I was working for GlaxoSmithKline, one specific company, for over 14 years. And I was diagnosed with spinal stenosis and nerve damage. The attorneys I consulted said, I can't let that information get out because they're going to fire me and just put me on disability, and that's the way it goes with liability paranoia today. So, making a long story short, I was driving for years with painkillers, putting myself and others in jeopardy, begging GlaxoSmithKline to let me be a part-time job share so I can reduce my driving. Human Resources says it was for women only. Human Resources told me it was for women only. So, I decided to stand for principle. Everybody in management in the company told me to shut up and stop asking for a part-time job share, even though they were hiring women off the street to be part-time job shares for other women in territories all over the country who wanted to work part-time. One of the attorneys I spoke to told me, as a white male, I do not have enough group self-pity points. One attorney told me, as a white male, I do not have enough group self-pity points. So, I had no recourse, I had no restitution, I had no protection under the law. And this is the way America is today. So, for Jay-Z and David Letterman, who lives here in Montana, who has a 10,000-acre ranch, I want to tell you that having white male privilege is so great. You hit the nail on the head. See, political correctness, folks, whether it be under the guise or subset of group identity politics, affirmative action quotas, doesn't matter. It probably 1,000 different subsets under political correctness. What it does, it lowers the bars of standards and expectations and creates division, all to make us submissive and break our will so they can throw these politically correct buzzwords at you in labels like controversial, racist, bigot, sexist, misogynist, homophobic, conspiracy theorists, etc. We have destroyed America from within by rewarding mediocrity. And it's up to us to do something about it. Because for the bottom 93%, opportunity, knowledge, ingenuity, productivity, and innovation, and anything has turned into the law of diminishing returns. Everything that's been normalized is on the chopping block, especially the middle class. And this is why we got to forget about this left-right paradigm. Now, next time Jay-Z and David Letterman get together, why don't you talk about the fact that I had a tax assessor come over, and they said that I live on grid, which changed my status, which I don't. I live off grid. They said I had a finished basement, which I don't. They said I have modern heat, which I don't. They said I had 2 finished bathrooms, which I don't. I don't even have 1 legal bathroom in my cabin. I live without a hot water heater and pressure tank. I flush my 1 indoor toilet with a bucket of water. I have no interior pipes. And yet, the state of Montana practiced fraud, which, by the way, does not have a statute of limitation, and change my evaluations for my tax. Jay-Z and David Letterman, why don't you talk about how left-wing news outlets whitened up the image of the Iranian Turk shooter who happened to be a female, Nassim Aghdam, and I know I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but she was the proven shooter, not alleged. She had been committed suicide from the article I read. And they not only lightened up her skin, but they gave her green eyes because her speech, she was upset because her speech was being censored, which is happening to all of us for Americans who don't toe the company line. So they described her as a white female wearing a headscarf. And Jay-Z and David Letterman, are you going to talk about that? David Rowe was interviewed by Tucker Carlson a couple weeks ago, and I asked Tucker over national radio, like I'm doing right now, because he was talking about how men, there's no value, and there's a value in work, and what's happening to the men in employment. How come this scenario that I just discussed is not being discussed on national TV? And if it is, it will be edited. It will be meant to be derogatory. You will speak over me so I can't get my points across, and you will take everything I say out of context. And this is America today, folks. Lowering the bars of standards and expectations in order to degrade and disrespect every group out there and insult the work ethic, the ability, and the intelligence of every group that the powers that be says you can't compete or your work is suboptimal. Doing the exact opposite of empowering a nation or a group or an individual. And this is what divide and conquer strategy does. Jay-Z and David Letterman. Facebook sent a cardiologist to several major U.S. hospitals to pitch a scheme that basically would combine a patient's medical file with data collected by Facebook. So basically, selling more data. So when all these females in America who have had an abortion and they have fertility problems or emotional problems, and they get targeted for whomever, for whatever drug by Big Pharma, or whatever consultation from some psychologist, who's responsible for this? How about the people who are overweight? Are they going to be bombarded with ads for diet stuff? You see, there's so many more important things that we need to talk about instead of a divide and conquer strategy, because that's pretty obvious that's what's going on. The middle class is becoming extinct, and what we need to do is stand for principle. And I have 3 criteria. It's very simple. The first is the same rules, laws, and accountability for everybody. The second is truth. In other words, you have to use objective facts in lieu of subjective emotional opinions for your arguments, but you have to be willing and have the guts to be willing to be hated for telling the truth instead of wanting to blow smoke up people's ass and telling certain people what they want to hear. And the third criteria is if someone does something and has less consequences for their behavior, then you should do it too. Doesn't matter what your skin pigmentation is. Doesn't matter what your gender is. Doesn't matter what your sex or sexual orientation, religion, ideology. This is all part of the divide and conquer strategy. And I want to thank Vincent Finelli and USAPrepares.com for allowing me to exercise my free speech, which is in the Bill of Rights and our Constitution, where millions of Americans gave their life for the freedoms that we enjoy today, which is eroding. There's four things that the bottom 93% of people cannot buy back, and that's freedom, liberty, time, and health. Now think about that statement. There's four things that we cannot buy back: freedom, liberty, time, and health. So it's pretty obvious that if you are in the bottom 93% of income earners, we are losing all of those. It's degrading quickly. And that's one of the reasons why I talk about Economics 101 on a regular basis, because I tried to incorporate and use the rationale of financial, economic, social, and political news and information to share with the American public on what's going on so we can talk about ideas and solutions to better our life, to give us an opportunity. Some of the facts that I've read recently, the U.S. is selling oil reserves for very little money because we're so desperate for dollars. And pretty soon, they've been saying that we're going to be going to QT, and I don't know if they've really started yet because I read a lot of articles they are, and I read a lot of articles that they are still doing some type of quantitative easing or printing of money by pressing buttons. Now, it could be in the form of other central banks in other countries, so-called buying our bonds or printing money themselves to buy our stocks and bonds, which is all happening, as well as the Fed buying our stuff. But if the Fed does go into QT in October, they're going to be selling them and not buying them. And we're going to talk more about some Economic 101 after the break. Thanks for being here, folks. Happy TGIF, America. This is Rich Scheben sitting in for Vincent Finelli, and boy, the time goes by fast. We have one more segment left. But I want to brush up on practice what you preach laws, which I try to mention as often as possible. It's very relevant, especially when you listen to the hypocrisy and double standards from like a David Letterman, who lives on a 10,000-acre ranch here in Montana, which I can guarantee you is in the upper $1 million. And too many people say that's the way it is, it'll never change. Basically, those are poster boys and girls for ignorance, apathy, and indifference, and we have to keep reminding the people that it's up to us to change our own destiny. So some examples of practice what you preach laws are people who are anti-gun, and yet they have the audacity, often using taxpayer dollars, to hire private security who have guns to protect them. And a lot of these people live behind closed gates as well. It's kind of like people who talk about global warming. And if you're looking at the snow coming down out my window, I could probably laugh the rest of this segment. But basically they talk about how we need to reduce our carbon footprint, while these people are flying around the country in jets, sometimes private jets, living in big homes, often multiple homes around the world, especially today's high-paying athletes and celebrities who have been duped and signed on the dotted line in the back room to basically pull for the globalist agenda, which is everything against the bottom 93%. It basically reinforces the aristocracy-serfdom relationship. So that being said, let's look at a little Economic 101 here, because I'm running out of time. And I never get past 10% of the things I want to discuss, but that's the way it goes. U.S. equity markets lead all major global markets in valuations. U.S. equity markets lead all major global markets in valuation. Now, some people might spin this and say, oh, this is optimism. And most people who do any reading and researching and look at the numbers and the math and look at the debt load, look at the credit collapsing, look at the yield curves getting close to inverting, people say, no, this is not optimism. This is a sign of overextended risks. I hear so much about trade because they try to blame Trump on trade. Trade is probably less than 15% of our economy. As I mentioned earlier and try to mention as often as possible, 70% of our GDP or our growth or our commerce in America is domestic consumption. So trade matters a lot more to China than it does to us if we're only 15%. And China doesn't even care about trademarks. They don't care about copyrights. They don't care about intellectual property rights. All this apathy and pointing the finger, and I'm not saying Trump is perfect, But if we had Hillary as president, we'd be in World War III right now with Russia. We would not have a Bill of Rights or Constitution, especially free speech or the ability to protect ourselves. So things could be a lot worse. You got to remember, here's a guy. He did some good things like getting rid of the TPP. He's a multi-billionaire. He doesn't need this job. I think he's taking like $1 salary or something. He doesn't need this abuse. He's doing this for the people of America. And the little people does not have representation. We don't have protection of the law. We have no restitution rights, as I gave some examples earlier in the show. And I think we should be very thankful that we have Donald Trump, even though he's not perfect. And if any of you think you're perfect, look in the mirror, because I know I'm an imperfect sinner. And I think we all are, and that's part about being human. That being said, when you don't care about intellectual property, copyrights, or trademarks, it just leads to more things like open borders, like not having a country, like global governance and global currency. Basically, big business is the only business that can now open new business because of all of our lobbying and our money under the table and subsidies and payoffs and corruption. And that makes it very difficult to level the playing field. And that's what Trump is trying to do. America, I want to thank you for listening to USAPrepares.com. Vincent Finelli will be back on Monday. Everybody have a great TGIF.